Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm Irene Sun-Woo. I'm the John H. Bryan Chair and Curator of Architecture and Design. And I'm so pleased you could join us for tonight's member program, which celebrates the exhibition Bruce Goff, Material Worlds, which is located in our new Regenstein Hall on the first floor of the museum near the spiral staircase. And before we begin, I kindly ask that you please silence your mobile devices, and thank you in advance. The exhibition Bruce Goff Material Worlds is expertly co-curated by Alison Fisher and Craig Lee. Based on several years of research, the exhibition explores the unbounded creativity of architect Bruce Goff, a figure known for his idiosyncratic homes, but also his pluralistic vision of modern architecture grounded in individuality, materiality, and fantastical invention. Drawn largely from the museum's extensive Goff collection, this exhibition is the first major show on the architect in more than 30 years and presents over 200 works, including drawings, models, little-known abstract paintings, and lots of other goodies, which you will hear about tonight. It is a truly remarkable project that is rooted in both scholarly rigor and joyful curatorial experiment. So my congrats to Alison and Craig on this amazing project. So thank you all for being here this evening for an exclusive look into the life and work of Bruce Goff. And just a reminder that tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. at the museum, co-curator Craig Lee will be in conversation with paintings conservator Kelly Keegan, another public program that will be focusing on Goff's tremendous painting practice. So we're grateful to the organizations and donors who have supported this exhibition. Major support for Bruce Goff Material Worlds is provided by Jack Butler and John Vanderlinden, Margot Levin-Schiff and the Harold Schiff Foundation, and Kathleen Nagel and Ralph Johnson, so our sincere thanks. And additional support is provided by the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts and Dirk Dennison and David Salkin. So thank you all for your generosity and continuing support of architecture and design. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Alison Fisher, the speaker for today's program. Alison is the Harold and Margot Schiff Curator of Architecture and Design here at the museum, where she specializes in alternative histories of modern architecture, design, and urbanism, and has curated several landmark exhibitions in these areas here at the museum. And in addition to co-curating Bruce Goff Material Worlds, her current work includes a long-term project on the Chicago Institute of Design and continuing research on graphic and furniture design from the 1990s. So please join me in welcoming Alison to the stage.
All right. Thank you, Irene, and thank all of you for joining us today to celebrate the dazzling world of architect Bruce Goff. If you can bear with me for a moment, I would like to take this opportunity to thank a few of the many people who made this exhibition possible. My warmest gratitude goes to my co-curator, Craig Lee, a brilliant researcher, wonderful collaborator, and a much beloved colleague at the museum. Over the past 6 years, we've mulled over every inch of Goff's creative output and tasted all the pies in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Sincere gratitude to my generous colleagues in the Department of Architecture and Design, including Irene Sun-Woo, Thomas Houston, Elizabeth Mesher, Anna Burkhart Perez, Melanie Arnold, Shatana Powell, and Holly McDonald. We were honored to work with Art Institute designers Kristen Zawensky and Samantha Grassi, working with external designers Evie Diamantopoulos and Jaffer Kolb of New Affiliates in New York, project manager Morgan McCommon, registrar Aaron Gordon, editor Sheila Majumdar, interpretation lead Marielle Epstein, remarkable conservators across the museum's many areas in book, paper, object, photo, painting, and textiles departments, Many talented colleagues and indefatigable work by our colleagues in art installation, lighting, capital projects, facilities, protection services, and many other departments across the museum. We are deeply grateful for wonderful collaborations with teams in museum archives, publishing, imaging, experience design, and audiovisual services that produce some of the most impactful and memorable elements of the project. And lastly, Craig and I are indebted to the many scholars, Goff homeowners, former students and friends, and museum and academic colleagues who shared information, objects, and memories. Thank you all so much. To understand Bruce Goff's unique contributions to American architecture, it's helpful to remember that the first half of his career almost perfectly overlaps with the global rise of modern architecture, particularly the kind of international style modernism promoted by European architects like Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier. These buildings were typically fine-tuned, cubic structures with a pared-down roster of materials: plaster, glass, steel, and brick. Contrast that approach with Goff, whose buildings explore new geometries, color palettes, and forms of architectural expression. For example, take his house for Elaine and William Grider in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. With a swooping form likened to an orchid or a cat, this violet-colored stucco building could not be farther from Mies van der Rohe's collection of steel and glass towers. This design separateness perhaps emphasized by the moody forest surrounding the building, which, for the record, is nothing like the suburban location on the Gulf Coast where it actually is, surrounded by palm trees. At a time when functionalism and structure were considered the highest values for the modern architect, Goff openly reveled in color, decoration, and materials. His houses explode with mosaic and other shimmery surfaces, shag carpeting, and prismatic windows, all of which are on display in one of his most elaborate projects, a home for Joe and Etsuko Price in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Another way that Goff stood apart from many important moderns of his day was his seemingly genuine interest in his clients and his unique ability to realize their personal ambitions within his own expressive language. Architectural historian and critic Penelope Dean has underscored this contrast with a wry comparison between Bruce Goff and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Bruce Goff accommodates, she says. "I just told him what I needed," Miss Ford relayed. Ludwig does not. "He won't let me have any closets," Dr. Farnsworth complained. In this comparison, the generous spaces and warmth of the pumpkin-shaped house Goff designed for painter Ruth Ford stands in stark contrast to the ultra-minimalism of Mies's house for Dr. Edith Farnsworth, a small jewel box of glass travertine and white-painted steel beams. Despite its dominance in the United States after World War II, the international style was not the only kind of 20th century modernism. Scandinavian design was always warmer and more accommodating of local influences. Frank Lloyd Wright's modernism embraced curves and organic materials. And the movement encompassed many idiosyncratic individuals, from Spanish architect Antoni Gaudí to German architect Erich Mendelsohn. Tellingly, it was in this diverse group that the radically independent young Goff would find his personal heroes. Goff was famously self-taught, with a talent for drawing that led to an apprenticeship at the tender age of 12 at Rush, Endicott and Rush, an architecture firm based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. While this path to the architectural profession was not unusual in the early decades of the 20th century, his intense curiosity about art and the natural world marked him as a prodigy. He established early correspondence with Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan, whose defiant creativity were powerful models for his future practice. And here showing you two designs, riffing on work by these maverick Midwesterners, creative when Goff was 15 and 16, respectively. It was Wright who encouraged Goff to remain independent, recommending against architecture school, which he felt would only serve to constrain the young architect's natural talent and creativity. Instead, Goff took on his own training program in modernism, keeping current on architectural trends from the German Bauhaus, Prairie School, and others through books and magazine subscriptions, and remarkably, ordering a large portfolio of work by Austrian painter Gustav Klimt on installment as a teenager from a sympathetic bookseller in New York City. This kind of engagement, active yet at a remove, established a lifelong pattern for Goff, whose large network of subscriptions, catalogs, and mail order forms would expose him to subjects as wide-ranging as science fiction and Balinese gamelan music. By age 22, Goff had already constructed several projects and was entrusted with a huge commission at Rush Endicott Rush to design a monumental building for the Boston Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church congregation in Tulsa. Boasting an ornately crowned 250-foot tall tower, the building was considered one of the finest Art Deco churches in the United States upon its completion. The structure's impressive scale and lavish interiors, elaborate stained glass, decorative plaster, and murals signaled both Goff's arrival as a mature designer and the burgeoning city's prosperity and ambition. Tulsa provided Goff with more than just commissions, however. There he found new inspiration in a creative circle that rivaled the avant-garde spaces one usually associates with Paris or New York in the 1920s. His group included painter Olinka Hurdy, poet and later romantic partner Richard Sanjewel, composer Ernest Brooks, art teacher Ada Robinson, and dancer Evelyn Hall, Goff's wife, from 1928 to 1932. With Hall, Goff held a kind of salon in an apartment decorated with stark black and white decor, where he introduced others to modern art and music, collaborated on the short-lived magazine Tulsart, you can see here on the right, through masquerade parties, and created improvisational musical compositions. And here I'm showing you on the left a charming photograph of Hall, Goff, and Hurdy dressed up as modern dance, modern architecture, and modern painting, respectively. While certainly part of his social development, this group also profoundly shaped Goff's professional and creative worldview. Instead of thinking only of local building commissions, he began to appreciate the interconnected nature of modernism, a recognition leading to a tripartite devotion to art, architecture, and music that would continue throughout his life. Often using the high rhetorical style of the manifesto, Goff and his circle imagined a new kind of creative life together. Most immediately, this work led the architect to rapidly evolve his own artistic practice, moving from the representational exercises of his youth to much more evocative studies of color and abstraction in the 1920s. He also began to advance his own musical education, taking piano and music theory classes and beginning a robust collaboration with his high school friend Ernest Brooks, a composer who would go on to work with Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin in southern Wisconsin. With Brooks and painter Hurdy, Goff recorded a series of pieces described by music theorist Nolan Vallier as atonal and polyrhythmic experiments created as a part of communal musical experiences. Goff then moved on to creating music for the player piano, and hopefully you'll see that soon in the show, a mechanical instrument that plays musical performances of existing compositions, which are recorded as punctured holes in long paper rolls, which allow air to pass through and play specific notes. Instead, Goff composed new works directly on blank player piano rolls, laboriously hand-cutting each hole with a hobby knife, thus creating a remarkably modern hack of a technological device, a kind of, quote, mechanical music. He would later stage public performances of these works after his 1934 move to Chicago, where they were received with some degree of confusion by local critics, who struggled to make sense of his approach, describing the works as angular and rhythmically baffling, a common reception, though, for experimental music. One important project of the period transformed Goff's living room experiments into a stunning multifunctional building for Patti Adams Shriner, a European-trained concert pianist who opened a popular piano school in Tulsa. In 1928, she commissioned Goff to create a combination music school, performance space, and private home on the banks of the Arkansas River. For this complex program, Goff created 2 interlocking volumes, a public face for the music school, with her residence tucked discreetly behind. The Deco-inspired facade has a striking design, with a huge round window at the center of the white stucco exterior, flanked by rectangular windows in a stepped pattern, recalling abstracted musical notes from the treble clef staff. For the interior, Goff imagined a dramatic lobby centered on abstract murals and surfaces with abundant color and texture. The symphony of decorations would enrich the space, preparing visitors for performances in the recital hall. He turned to painter and close friend Alinka Hurdy to realize the project's complex mural programs. In the lobby, Hurdy painted Symphony for the Arts, on the right, a 16-foot-tall mural featuring a stylized dancer, piano keys, and musical notations against a backdrop of architectural forms. In the recital hall, she painted 8 vertical murals depicting different kinds of musics, which they termed modern American, vocal, piano, string, orchestra, primitive, choral, and music of the future. Although original murals no longer exist, these watercolor studies represent her collaboration with Goff and their shared celebration of the arts, architecture, dance, music, and painting. In the context of these interdisciplinary interests, Hurdy's murals appear particularly progressive in that they seek to give visual form to sonic experience and movement, performing a kind of synesthesia that is also suggested in Goff's work. Goff's collaborations with Hurdy were mutually beneficial. Co-curator Craig Lee writes about the influence of Hurdy's lush sense of color and strong compositions on the architect's own paintings practice, while exposure to Goff's modern architecture pushed the painter to embrace greater abstraction than her previous murals in Norman and Oklahoma City. And for more on Goff's evolution as an abstract painter, please come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a fascinating discussion between Craig and painting conservator Kelly Keegan. Goff's life changed radically as shifting economies of the Great Depression caused commissions to dry up in the late 1930s, or the late 1920s. His architecture firm was dissolved in 1932, just 3 weeks after he was made partner. At 28 years old, Goff found himself unemployed for the first time since age 12. Yet soon a door opened. With a job offer from sculptor Alfonso Iannelli, whom he'd met in Tulsa, in 1934, Goff moved to Chicago, newly separated from his wife and open to new possibilities. Moving to the far north side of Chicago, Goff embarked on a passionate relationship with poet Richard Sanjewell. Despite his financially precarious situation, Goff took pains to personalize their modest live-work studio on Howard Street as part of a shared devotion to modernist beauty and queer artistic sensibilities. This is explored also in the exhibition catalog in great depth and complexity by scholar Scott Herring. On Howard Street, Goff covered windows with gold lame curtains that sparkled against the space's jet black walls. Installations of his own design, including a strand of bead and shells and an elaborate sculpture made of white string, create a dynamic effect. The few extant photographs also show a ceiling with light-diffusing fabric and spare yet elegant decorations, such as a large gong, Japanese prints, and a delicate arrangement of translucent silver dollar leaves. Historian Tim Samuelson has remarked that these glittering effects may have riffed on the bright signage of the many dance halls and bars in the area, but they also represent a personal, cultivated aesthetic. However humble, this interior contains the seeds of an approach to materials and decoration that would define much of Goff's mature practice, including hanging elements, dramatic color choices, and a mix of more traditional artworks and custom, quote, installations made of natural and manufactured objects. After leaving Iannelli's studio, Goff found work with a building products manufacturer, Libby Owens Ford Glass Company. There, he remodeled the company's space in the merchandise mart and studied the architectural applications of the company's vitrolite glass, an opaque colored glass panel that was popular in Art Deco and streamlined modern architecture. One of these studies, on the right, for a hypothetical house, features broad expanses of glass block walls and exterior cladding in blue glass. Goff extends the house's cubic geometry into the surrounding landscape, with square pavers, linear paths, and tall columnar hedges that flicker green and blue on the dark ground, making a visionary image for a prosaic building material. By the mid-1930s, Goff had regained his footing and began his own architecture practice, leading to a string of commissions for single-family homes in the Chicago area. Because of these projects' modest size and budgets, often limited by regulations from the Federal Housing Administration, Goff exercised his creative architectural language with select design elements. Angled windows and trellises filled with plants enlivened the exterior of his home for Frank and Ruth Cole, close friends of Goff who shared an interest in modern classical music. The front door incorporates clear glass ashtrays, a novel and economical way to create windows, and one of the many experiments in incorporating found objects into his original or architectural compositions. During this time, Goff continued to evolve his paintings practice, incorporating elements of collage and sprayed paint, while also beginning to approach architecture from a more experimental direction. All in all, Goff's time in Chicago had a seismic effect on his career, broadening his worldview and feeding into the great mix of natural and artificial, high and low, geometric and organic that would define his work after World War II. It was also in Chicago that Goff began his teaching career, serving as an instructor of interior design at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts, a private school owned by painter Ruth Ford. This experience proved fruitful, allowing him to gain experience as an educator and leading to two of the most important commissions of his early solo practice, the Irma Bartman House in Louisville, Kentucky, for the mother of one of his Chicago students, and the Ruth and Sam Ford House in Aurora, Illinois. The Ford House was a watershed in Goff's practice, a single-family home whose distinctive pumpkin or dome-like shape was the result of a unique prefabricated construction system, metal ribs from a temporary shelter developed for military use during World War II, the Quonset hut. Goff first repurposed the Quonset hut using its more conventional half-cylinder shape in his design for the Camp Parks Chapel, a church on the U.S. Navy base near San Francisco, built during his time in the Seabees during the war. For the Ford House, however, Goff organized these metal ribs, here painted a bright red-orange, vertically around a center copper mast to create a dramatic open volume with a skylight that accommodated Ruth's cantilevered painting studio above and the kitchen below. The project also incorporated indoor-outdoor fireplaces, round bathing tubs lit by acrylic domes salvaged from military aircraft, soffits covered with military surplus rope, and Goff's first use of what would become a signature masonry treatment, deep black coal blocks and blue-green unprocessed glass chunks, or cullet. The final result was so unusual that the Fords felt the need to preemptively fend off criticism during the home's construction with a bold, hand-painted sign that declared to the suburban passerby, "We don't like your house either." Our exploration of Goff's deep engagement with everyday material was reinforced by the unconventional contents of the Bruce A. Goff collection at the museum's Ryerson and Burnham Art and Architecture Archives. There, in addition to more conventional materials such as correspondence, clippings, and file folders, Craig and I found a huge cast of personal possessions, which encompass everything from Goff's clothing to building material samples that he lived with throughout his life. Through this category of objects termed realia by archivists, we saw a new way to understand unconventional materiality of many of Goff's architectural projects, as well as physical evidence of his incredibly varied sources of information. For example, in his collection of plastic puzzles and mirrored ornaments, we saw new ways that these humble objects, purchased at dollar stores or secondhand shops, transported him into new worlds of perception. And other examples of shells and crystals were powerful models for the many natural geometries in his architectural projects. One of the lead images for the show shows a similarly designed environment serving as a backdrop for a portrait taken in his office at the University of Oklahoma, where he served as chair for the school's architecture department in the early 1950s. There, unexpected juxtapositions abound with peacock feathers, Japanese pamper lanterns, a Hopi Katsina figure, and a hanging geometric star, all under an unusual ceiling treatment of dried tumbleweeds attached to the ceiling by a network of crisscrossed white string, a powerful preview of Goff's multidisciplinary approach at OU. Goff thrived at the university. There, he developed a curriculum that stressed creativity and independence, values embodied by his heroes, Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright. He mentored young architects and expanded the school's cultural footprint, organizing lectures by modern architects and hosting listening sections for modern classical music. Goff designed several buildings for OU's campus, including a very unconventional fraternity house and two major unbuilt projects, a building for the journalism program you can see at the right, and Crystal Chapel. For this soaring crystalline building, Goff proposed sandwiching 2 layers of faceted glass panels around bright pink fiberglass insulation, a material typically hidden in the walls and roofs of suburban tract houses. Beyond its thermal properties, Goff chose this material for its quality as of light diffusion and its remarkable color, which determined the scheme down to the supporting piers of pink granite. Despite support from leading architects, donors balked at this unconventional design, and a more conventional chapel was built on the campus by another architect. At OU, he also refined his distinctive form of dress, often wearing bolo ties, monochromatic ensembles in bold colors, and polyester shirts with wild patterns from geometric motifs to high sheen metallics, not unlike the hues and textures found in the buildings he designed. A colleague at OU remarked, he wore garish clothing as if to shock people, a sartorial choice associated with his identity, either as an avant-garde artist or as a gay man, or both. We've included a sampling of these shirts in the project, as Goff's playful and exuberant fashion was an important form of his self-expression, offering a realm of personal freedom even in his new administrative role. Goff's creative connections with faculty members at OU also led to other commissions, notably his house for artists Eugene and Nancy Bavinger. Built from 1950 to 1955, this house was a media sensation before it was even completed, and had a domestic interior unlike anything the American public had seen before. Inspired by the geometry of shells, the Bavinger house rose from the ground in a logarithmic spiral, with walls built of local stone and chunks of blue-green cullet, all suspended from a central mast. The house was largely self-built by the owners, with help of students from OU, where Eugene served as the chair of the art department. The lush interior contained inventive furnishings and hanging bedrooms and living pods instead of rooms, rising in a spiral pattern with the structure, surrounded by netting and curtains for privacy. The interior also featured elaborate water gardens, a large network of shallow pools surrounded by lush plantings and flagstone paths so extensive that Goff described the interior as a, quote, conservatory for plants and birds, a kind of artificial nature recreated for the delight and inspiration of his clients. This feature was highlighted in a Life magazine photograph from 1955 that shows the Bavingers' young son playing in a pool while Eugene dangles his feet in the water. Nothing about this image, from the shadowy lighting to the rough-hewn rocks and tropical plants, recalls a conventional house. What it does resemble is the grotto, another kind of fantasy interior that transfixed the public in an earlier era. Drawings for the project by Goff's colleague Herb Green draw out the romantic qualities of the Bavinger house in its natural setting. Yet once inside, most views of the landscape were cut off by these solid masonry walls. Detailed views of the staircase and dining area show ledges, walls, and floors that are so densely populated with foliage and decorations that they appear to move. These elements include moss, purple bearded irises, spidery ferns, and giant caladium leaves, as well as more mysterious objects resembling shelf mushrooms, crystals, driftwood, and coral. In short, decorations typically associated with grottos in the early 19th century. Like the picturesque tradition that gave birth to the grotto and the conservatory, the artificial cave and the artificial garden, the Bavinger house reflects civilization and wilderness, art and nature, all at once. This project was the culmination of Goff's long-standing interest in blurring the boundaries between interior and exterior in his domestic designs. His experimentation with this idea began back in the early 1930s with drawings that show plants streaming over the facades of buildings. This hypothetical study in the 1940s for the unbuilt Johann A. Wold house shows Goff's first fully elaborate interior garden, complete with climbing vines and a flower bed that extends under an adjacent plate glass window to join plantings outside, here seen on the right. He expanded this naturalistic focus in the adjacent sitting area, which features a fireplace carved out of rough stone masonry and bark-covered logs supporting the furniture, creating a subtle sort of strangeness, mixing natural elements with highly industrial ones that would prove defining for his career. These uncanny appropriations of the natural world continued in other ways in Goff's later practice. For example, in the unbuilt Bob and Doreen Barnes house shown at left, Goff employed narrow outdoor footbridges draped with netting that resemble spider webs. Similarly, in his 1964 commission for Betty and James Nicol, Goff centered the house on a large double-height living area that included a conversation pit with a fountain, gas-powered fire ring, and skylight, surrounded by an expanse of grass-green shag carpeting. While following some domestic fashions of the time, Goff's design can also be read as abstract references to natural elements, including water, fire, sunlight, and the large lawns of the Kansas City suburbs. Goff also embraced new building materials, including artificial lawn, astroturf, and plush zebra print fabric that enabled him to reference natural textures and patterns in exquisitely synthetic forms. In short, his use of organic shapes and qualities often appears as a kind of distillation or exaggeration of nature itself. These ideals can also be seen in Goff's paintings, where he often created biomorphic and vegetal forms with the most artificial materials, like crystal craze, a liquid resin first popularized in the 1950s to decorate glass aquariums. When dried, this material creates dramatic crystalline surfaces that resemble geodes and frost, adding another dimension to his work of a dense forest with flowing and shimmering shapes. Circling back to OU, Goff's success at the university ended abruptly in 1955, when he was forced to resign as chair of the architecture school. The sudden move was sparked by a homophobic sting operation and his subsequent arrest on moral grounds. This was just one of many such attacks on gay men during the Lavender Scare, a period of widespread stigma against and prosecution of homosexuality in the United States. His friendship with Joe Price, a former OU engineering student, provided a lifeline in this difficult transition. Price invited Goff to reestablish his independent practice in an office in the newly completed Price Tower, a mixed-use corporate headquarters for the H.C. Price Company, a pipeline construction firm founded by Joe's father, Harold C. Price. Goff was intimately familiar with this impressive skyscraper, having recommended Wright to Harold as a potential designer for the landmark building years earlier. From the strikingly modern perch, he embarked on a nearly 30-year professional relationship with Joe Price. Between 1953 and 1976, Goff created a house called Shin'enkan, or House of the Faraway Heart in Japanese, after the studio of 18th century artist Ito Takutu. This spectacular house and gallery was built in 3 phases for Joe, his wife Atsuko, and their growing family. In many ways, it stood as a monument to Goff and Price's shared passions for beauty, Japanese art, and nonconformist living. The project went through many iterations, with several schemes for a bachelor pad for Joe Price, with angular geometries and materials. You can see the crystal and fan coral decoration at left that strain our understanding. The most iconic view of this now lost project is the house's monumental double-height living room, complete with a hexagonal conversation pit and retractable bar, angled walls for viewing art, purple glass window wells, custom furnishings, and a skylight lined with goose feathers, and a centerpiece that Goff called Cellophane Rain, a hanging sculpture made of strips of plastic that catch the light as they move in the air. Truly a singular space in the history of modern architecture. In the 1950s and 60s, Goff expanded his practice westward, engaging with the economies, landscapes, and collective imagination of the American West. Many of Goff's projects during this period, from the Venus Soft Drinks Bar on the left to the Black Bear Motor Lodge on the right, fit into a broad category known as roadside architecture. These quirky and often nostalgic structures were built alongside highways, such as Route 66, to support growing middle-class automobile tourism after World War II. Other projects, such as Goff's 1948 Hopewell Baptist Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, show an alternative kind of site specificity that drew on local knowledge, labor, and materials. This low-cost church was built by a congregation of oil field workers using pipes of their trade. Described as a cross between a teepee and an oil derrick, this dramatic conical building recalls the iconic dwellings of nomadic Native Americans from the Great Plains, but with industrially inspired supports. Growing up in Oklahoma, Goff encountered much indigenous art, craft, and dance. These strong memories contributed to his later interest in Native American paintings, like the ones you see here, which he began collecting around 1950, primarily by Oklahoman and Southwestern artists. He especially favored works by Kiowa artist Woody Big Bow, whose flat style emphasized line, shape, and color in figures depicted on a stark plain background. You can see, pardon me. You can see that here. Although his collection of contemporary indigenous artworks is modest in number relative to his large collection, Goff prominently displayed these on the wall in his office at OU and seems to have referenced iconography from Native American art and building traditions in his architectural designs. In 1955, Goff created a project for the proposed Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, one of his few entries into an architectural competition. In this dense sheet seen on the left, he depicts multiple plans for the project, including 6 horse-shaped buildings surrounding a towering central stake, recalling nothing but a game of horseshoes. Alongside his 1961 Viva Casina and Hotel at Wright, the design shows Goff engaging at a high level with the popular culture of his time. The project was so vivid and seemingly humorous, it led critics to state that he had effectively, quote, out-camped both the rodeo and the Las Vegas Strip. Through his canny experiments with different genres of regional and roadside architecture, Goff explored the many sides of Western identity. And as Goff moved into his last decade of practice, he began working on larger projects that allowed him to realize important aspects of his vision for integrating architecture with artistic and social life. In 1979, his patrons at Seco and Joe Price commissioned Goff to design a building displaying and housing their sizable collection of Japanese paintings and screens. After an unsuccessful proposal to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, Goff designed a freestanding building for their collection of art on the campus of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA. Curved roof beams and translucent walls evoke Japanese architectural elements, and tokonoma alcoves inspired by Japanese domestic architecture enable visitors to view the art in natural light without barriers. Water gardens and the exterior landscaping continue inside the main gallery, where visitors can ascend a ramp to 3 different levels. At more than 30,000 feet, this was Goff's largest and most public project, completed after his death by his close associate Bart Prince. The building immediately captured the public's imagination with its outre design, showcasing a radical ambition for artistic community that defined Goff's practice from beginning to end. Our project at the Art Institute aims to create a similarly welcoming space for our visitors. By expanding public understanding of Goff's diverse and often beguiling productions, the exhibition offers new narratives about the architect's broad worldview, thus making a case for his central place in 20th century American culture. Thank you so much for joining us today.